Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shakespeare & Company. There's never been a book quite like Sarah Pascoe's Animal. Part autobiography, part anthropology, part biological exploration, part feminist manifesto, and with a whole load of jokes thrown in for good measure. Rarely has a book with such a friendly-looking jacket been so determinedly subversive. Over 3 main sections entitled Love, Body and Consent, Sarah Pascoe gives a funny, frank and illuminating tour of the female body, busting evolutionary myths, overturning taboos, and investigating the animal urges that have shaped human relationships and sexuality throughout history and into the modern day. All with a refreshing sense of mischief and irreverence, honed over more than a decade as one of Britain's leading stand-up comedians. In addition to appearing on stage in clubs and theatres all over the UK, Sarah Pascoe is well known for her appearances on TV comedy shows, including Live at the Apollo, QI and Have I Got News for You, as well as for acting in programmes such as 2012, The Thick of It, and a personal favourite, The Brilliant Campus. Sarah is also a columnist for The Guardian and has written for The Independent, Glamour, The Stylist, Woman's Weekly and Standard Issue magazine. Animal, the autobiography of a female body, is her first book. Please welcome her to Shakespeare & Company.
Thank you so much. I am so due on my period, and that list of compliments is so hard not to cry. Just right at the beginning, like, just saying nice things about me in front of all these people.
You're with friends. You're very welcome to get weepy if you want to. So I guess where I'd like to start is your reasons behind writing the book. So it's not uncommon for stand-up comedians to go on to write books, whether that be novels or memoirs. But this is quite, as I said in the introduction, quite unlike the general approach stand-up comedians have.
So first of all, being a stand-up comic, which is a brilliant job that I'd really recommend to anybody, is a brilliant job, and people think because you can do that, you can do other things, like write a book. So they come along and go, oh, would you like to do another thing you're not qualified for? I have always always wanted to write a book. My fantasies of myself when I was a teenager, and I think like lots of teenagers, I was unhappy, and I thought, oh, they'll show them one day, whoever they were, people at school, but so that's who they were. They know who they are. Will I accept your friendship request? Yes. But I really, really loved reading as a young person. I read Enid Blyton until I was far too old. I used to hide in the toilets. I loved the way that stories... I was an unsophisticated reader, but I was a passionate reader. And I always knew that one day I wanted to write a book. And actually, when I was about 18 or 19, I talk about this at the beginning, I wanted to write a book about sex because I thought we should be more open as a society, and I thought there was no reason for prudery. And I kind of forgot about this until someone, after my Edinburgh show, I talked a little bit about bonobos and monogamy, and I'd fallen madly in love with this boy, and I didn't know if I believed in forever and how difficult it is when you're falling in love, and all you want to believe in is that this is an ending, but everything in my life before that had disproved it. And so I met with someone at Faber, her name's Sarah, and she said, oh, you could write a book. And then I started thinking about this and this Edinburgh show and actually having much more space to explore it. And then without it being a stand-up show, I could be much more serious. I could talk about things like child marriage and abortion and there's things that I had tried to talk about on stage and just very sad. No one's like really laughing. Which was annoying.
And so you decided to avoid the easy route of just sort of a standard memoir, let's say. You decided to...
I just haven't done anything that interesting. Honestly, arrogance-wise, I always think about it. I keep a diary. I've always kept diaries since I was little, and I've been keeping a diary in Paris, and I look back at it and I still write my diaries. You know, like in your cafe, you've got some of Sylvia Plath's diaries. Like, man... how could she write it? It sounds so good. Because mine still sounds like I'm 12. Like, I'm in Paris, I feel alone. It's Valentine's Day, saw a man nearly get run over. Like, what? How does she just spill all these things out about dreams? I honestly today tried for about half an hour to write it how Sylvia Plath would write it. And I'm just so try-hard. So yeah, autobiography, not yet.
And so when you met with the people from Faber and you decided, okay, I'm going to write this book.
Yeah.
Do you think one of the things that drove you to this particular subject matter as well, it's something you talk about in the beginning of the book, is that as a stand-up comic, you are constantly reminded about the fact that, you're not a stand-up comic, you're a female stand-up comic, and you're often introduced as a woman on stage by the comperes.
Oh yeah, but also it's the whole environment around it. It's a qualifier, and often people are trying to be very kind towards you when they say it. And I notice now that lots of other jobs have it. I keep noticing at the moment with murderers, people are always described as a female murderer, and I wonder if they're annoyed. Like if they're like, I'm just a killer. Like, I would have done loads more if I hadn't been caught.
Murderess wouldn't have cut it either.
God, cool. I hate the word murderess. There's lots and lots of. Actually, I was watching a true crime documentary last night. I really know how to enjoy myself, guys. And it was a detective who was a woman, and she was saying, as a female detective, and she was talking about how the different ways that how she uses her gender effectively in interviews, because she says most of these criminals respect their mothers, and it was really interesting because she was calling herself a female detective in a way that I guess my hackles always rise, and I always call myself and my colleagues comics and comedians. But yeah, I got a heightened awareness because people in a nice way kept saying to me, we always try to have a woman on the bill. And it's really nice. The first time, this is me gossiping about a comic I really respect, which sounds nasty, but I did a radio job with Frank Skinner about 6 or 7 years ago, and he's a comic I've always really admired. He's so quick, he writes a lot, he's prolific, and he said to me just before we went out in front of the audience, he said, it's always nice when there's a woman. And I asked, why? And he was like, it's just a bit less testosterone-y. And I was so angry, and then I was so testosterone-y for the whole of this radio show. It was a radio show where essentially you had to try and interrupt each other and be funny, and I made myself this thing that whenever he went up to the microphone, I would just buzz before he spoke, and then so I never had anything to say, but I'll just buzz him out, and then he'll never ever think that women aren't testosterone-y ever again. Like I'll just be this awful, and that's what I did, and it's never worked with me again.
And so when you've agreed to write this book, and then you talk about it as being sort of bringing together two conversations. So the conversation of scientists and the conversation of cultural commentators. Was there this kind of, had you done all of the reading before, all of the research? Were these ideas which were sort of swimming about in your head already, or was this something which you had to set out and determinedly research?
I had to continue researching it, and I think I could have never finished the book in terms of research. I could have carried on, and also there's more books that have come out since that I wish I'd read at the time, and books I found out about afterwards. I'm constantly kicking myself in bookshops like, I should have read that. It's got all the answers inside it. But I definitely knew that I wanted the science to be more accessible. So I'm someone who grew up without a science background, and probably like lots of people at school thought I was very bad at things. I was good at English literature and I was good at drama, as in they were easy to me, but there were other things that felt more complex to my brain, so I didn't try. And I really wanted to write a book that if me then had picked it up at 14 or 15, I wouldn't have felt like, oh, this is out of my remit as a reader, or out of my understanding. I wanted it to be so comprehensive, because I think sometimes when we're, especially even in the books I was researching in, sometimes when we're trying to appear like we're right or we're knowledgeable, we lose people by not simplifying it, because I guess it's harder to argue with something you don't quite grasp. Whereas if you make it really comprehensive, someone can go, I know why that's wrong.
Yeah. And there's actually, I mean, it's not about sexuality or biology, but there's an episode near the beginning of the book where you talk about going for interviews at Cambridge.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah. And you mention, in the interview they ask you which philosophers you'd read, and you talk about Sophie's World, the Jostein Gardner book, and that was something that really struck home, in that I think it's because, of course, that was actually a book that, again, as a teenager, I'd read, and that had introduced me to philosophy. And there was really this sense of sort of snobbery, but also there's a real talent, I think, in bringing complex ideas to a wider audience, which isn't necessarily acknowledged often.
Yeah, I guess because it seems simplified, that maybe someone who already knows about a lot of those things is definitely not the audience for it. There's another example I would say, like stand-up on television. So stand-up's what I love, and that's my craft, and stand-up see a lot of stand-up where it should happen, which is live and in clubs, and stand-up on TV is very, very homogenized and sanitized, and it's not in the room. It loses everything that actually it's a live form, and so quite often if you meet a member of the public and they tell you their favourite comic, there's a real thing, snobbery in comedy, where you think, well, you don't know what you're talking about. You've never been to a gig. It would be like if someone says, oh, I love jazz, Van Morrison's amazing. And that is not me slagging off Van Morrison. My dad's a jazz musician, and that would be his like worst nightmare, like having to compose his face when he wants to hit someone with his saxophone. What a bastard. Also, jazz is terrible, but wrong crowd. So we can all do that. We have things that we love, and because we've studied them, we understand them better. We know when something's a poor version. But if it is a gateway into something else, I think we should be really grateful for and excited about it.
You've talked a little bit, a few times, about your audience. Now, I think in reading the book, I think there's a real universality to it. I actually think that anybody of any gender or any age could learn a lot from it. I mean, there was certainly plenty in it that I either didn't know or that made me think again about different things. But at a few times during the book, you make a couple of cultural references. I think one is to Look Who's Talking, sort of John Travolta movie from the 80s, is it?
Yeah. Sound like you don't know. It's your favourite film. It's your favourite film. You love it.
Yeah, you've busted me. But then you say, oh, you're probably too young to remember. Insert your own cultural reference here, or something along those lines. Was it Did you have a particular interest in reaching out to people younger than you, and specifically younger women?
I definitely wanted to not exclude anybody. It's really interesting, this thing, and it's interesting because gender feels like it shouldn't be a division because it's half of people, but it's really odd how if you write a book which sounds like it's written for women, it's considered a women's book, whereas like the majority of books that I've read, like 98%, assumed I was a male reader, and I didn't throw them away, like, or going, what relevance is it to me? Like, I don't even have testicles. Like, how would I understand this? Why would I care what a man does? So it's really odd. People who have been so well-meaning. A comic wrote on my Facebook wall the other day, I know it's not aimed at me, but I really enjoyed your book. And I honestly, again, my hackle's rising, and I'm too soon. Like, what do you mean it's not aimed at you? And he went, well, it assumed the reader was a woman, and I just couldn't even reply, because it's really difficult when you feel like you're having to show the world, spin it round to somebody, when you feel like they should be doing that themselves. That's what we're doing all of the time, trying to work out how it is for other people. But I guess this is the thing about us all kind of having a dialogue together rather than shouting at each other, is that if every book you've ever read has assumed you're a man and you are a man, why would you notice that? Well, you would never think, hang on, I've never read a book that assumes I'm female.
It's interesting because I don't think I've ever sort of, or generally consciously read books and think that sort of assuming the reader is a man, but I also think there is this thing of the sort of, in society generally, there is this idea of the man is kind of the standard unit
the
of
default,
measurement.
yes,
exactly, yeah, and sort of anything else is a sort of deviation.
And it's really huge because as for women, who we should definitely, we should think of ourselves as a default, as in the other default. We are really used to feeling like a subculture, which is crazy.
And there are quite a few people I've spoken to who've said, I wish I'd had this book at a certain age, sort of generally somewhere between about 15 and 20. Was that in your mind a little bit when you were writing it? Like, this is the kind of book you wish that you had had?
Yes, it was definitely there. And I think this is the thing that's sometimes misleading as well. I didn't write a children's book, and it's not a book for young adolescents. But the responses that are most exciting to me are from young people that age, because again, I think like lots of people who think the world is getting better, it gets better because of how we educate young people with the knowledge that we share them, and then the empowerment we give them to continue making things better. Sex education in schools, I don't know what it's like in France, and you guys can tell me later, but it's in the UK it's getting worse and worse rather than better. And
in what way?
Well, there's less of it. Our government doesn't care about things that you can't be examined on, so religious education and sex education are being pushed out of the syllabus. Religious schools are now back allowed, which means that the religion that your parents are dictates the schools that you go to, and they can make sure you don't learn about anything that might conflict with that. And that's really terrible, because actually you want to have a society where whatever happens in the home, there is somewhere else that's kind of secular, where you're allowed to question anything and then come up with your own ideas. So the importance of the rest of the culture trying to combat that, so that there are kind of people write blogs, and there's Twitter and the internet, and also so writing a book going, well, there's just something that if it's not in their school library, they can borrow from someone or get on a Kindle, and it would kind of fight in that way, which then sounds very self-aggrandizing. I'm not trying to do that myself. I'm trying to be part of it, because I have a whole thing, like I'm 35 and I don't have children, and I might never have children, but I do think that part of being a good part of society is having like maternal instincts, or being generative, worried about the next generation and what they do, and also thinking that's just as much my responsibility as their families, if that makes sense.
And that there is a very big element to the book which is sort of you transmitting through stories of your own experience, maybe certain, not necessarily lessons that you learned, but sort of laying it out there and saying sort of, this is the way I'm muddled through in the past, this is a way I got it wrong. It's
not self-help in any way, and it's always been very honest. This is a subjective experience that doesn't extrapolate into anyone else. I'm not saying this is all women, this is all white women, this is all women from Essex, but just trying to go, this is how it felt to me at the time. And also with those moments, the only ones that stayed in were the ones that could be interesting. So that was always the main thing. Is this interesting to other people, and why is it interesting? I had to cut 20,000 words on karaoke because no one wanted to hear about my karaoke theories. When I was 14 and 15 and 16, my sister and I did karaoke for money. Okay, so it was huge for me. We had no money, but we would go, we would pretend to be overage in bars, and we would sing, and sometimes we'd win competitions and we'd get £50 or £200. And my editor was like, why are you telling me this? And I was like, it's a rags to riches story. Now I've got a book deal.
It's like Cosette for the late 20th century.
Yeah.
And indeed, there's a moment where you say that your manager, or your career mum, I think you call her, sort of advised you certain things. Are you sure you want to write about this? Because once it's out there, once it's on paper. And yet you were quite defiant. You said, no, I think this should be out there. Was there any kind of hesitation about how much of yourself and your personal experience you should put on the page?
No, my default is I love sharing. Like, I think the instant I feel shame and then have to tell someone, like, it's very communicative for me. I think telling other people the things that you most hate about yourself, I think you get a little bit of calm in your soul, and I'm like that, and I'm especially like it after half a glass of wine. I'm fascinated with people who can keep secrets. I'm fascinated with private people. It's so interesting to be like, how do you just walk around knowing things and not saying them? And the opposite, I just vomit it all out, and I do that in real life, and I did in my book, and so I had to be reined in, especially legally. You're not allowed to say things about other people. I had to change names. I thought this was going to be revenge on several ex-boyfriends that I could now just detail everything about, and they made me. So Faber tried 3 times to tell me what the law was on privacy, and then they faxed me the whole legal document and said, read it so you understand. You can't just say, and his name was this, and then he did this, and then he didn't call me back again. And why not? Because I'm lovely. So it was a real learning experience. So it was never an aspect of I didn't want anyone to know. And again, it's that thing of like, to young people, if there was a young man or a woman reading something in a similar stage themselves, I have to be very careful how I read my website emails now since the book came out, and it's really, really wonderful. But people email me now to tell me their personal experience and offer those experiences, and these are trans people and men and women, and it often relates to something from the book. It'll be like, and they'll go, I'm just getting ready to telling people, or I've just told my mum and now I'm trying to tell more people, or they'll go, I'm not ready to tell people yet, but I'm just going to tell you because you told me your experience. And I have to make sure I'm in the right mood, because I just get so upset. But it's really, really wonderful that it happens, and I'm not saying that anyone should stop, and I don't like it, but I just have to make sure I feel very strong, because there are days where you go like, the world is so horrible, and I just want to take all of the people and like put them in my womb where they'll be safe.
It's funny actually that you mentioned the sort of this your default position being sort of telling people.
Yes.
I think it's later on in the book there's a short sentence where you say no shame, more prevention. And that seems to sum up, I think, quite a bit of the approach of the book. In fact, it's sort of you're sharing your experience, and you're sharing some of the scientific knowledge, which we'll talk about in a moment, as a sort of almost sort of as a sort of a curative for the sort of the shame other people might be feeling.
I think, do you know, if I was going to say, phrase it slightly differently now, in that instance, which is about sort of unwanted pregnancies, but I think if we extend it out, I think at the moment, like a lot of us, there are people in the same society as us who had exactly the same upbringings that believe things that seem completely opposite to us. And there's a real binary going on in almost every country, on the right and the left, and it seems like empathy failure on both sides, where we don't really understand things in the same way. And I feel like if you disagree with anyone, especially if you disagree with them with vehemency, like every cell of me knows you're wrong, you need to kind of backtrack from all the emotion and go back to how can you sensibly discuss these things with them. There's so much learning to happen on both sides, and I feel like with that, like the no shame, more prevention, shame isn't quite the right emotion, but when we're disagreeing with people, we need to be going back to how, again, it comes back to young people and how we're discussing things and how the culture around them is discussing things. How can we make sure that we all know we all got the same information, rather than thinking, no, actually, if you came through this environment and went to this kind of school, or it's really interesting, but higher education, which again our societies don't really value in the same way, the way they used to, as that ceases, there's a big difference in the knowledge people have had access to, and I think we combat that, and then we can have better discussions.
And as you say at one point as well, I think that sort of none of the things I say are supposed to be definitive or the final word. I just want to be part of the conversation and having that conversation.
Well, that's the thing. I'm wrong all the time, and also I disagree with myself, and
repeatedly in the book.
And also then having to actually finish it and go, I know I'm going to hate so much of what I said in a year's time, because I still feel like, and it's fun, but I don't have a sense of self. I always feel like a completely different person. And so having things quoted back to you that you said is really hard. And you go, what an idiot.
I'll keep it to a minimum. So interwoven with the personal experience, as I said, it's this sort of summary of a lot of current contemporary scientific knowledge about the female body, about sexuality, about human relations. I'd like to talk about that for a little bit, but I'd like to begin firstly with the choice of the title, Animal. Was there something sort of provocative about that?
Number one, I'll say, writing a book takes ages and anyone can do it. So I'm just going to say this now in case there's not another window for it, and any of you, hopefully all of you, are planning to write books or you've already written them. It seems like a thing that other people can do and you can't. And essentially what it is just like loads of little emails added together that are terrible, and then someone else edits it, which means they just tell you which bits are most terrible, and then you write those bits again, and then again, and then again, and over ages it becomes a book. But at the beginning, no one, it's unfathomable that anyone can actually get there and finish it. And also, it's so lucky no one sees the drafts. Like 20,000 words on karaoke. No one ever sees the drafts. And naming a book is then the most awful thing. Like they started CCing me out of emails about the cover because I wanted to be a mermaid swimming underwater, and then they said no, and I said like okay, and then I said I want it to be a mouse with my face, but it looks like I am a mouse, and then they didn't let me have any more decisions. Oh, this lovely thing though, I know I haven't answered your question yet, a lovely thing, a woman sent me she was on Instagram, she sent me a message, she said, I'm a really slow reader, I got your book for Christmas and I haven't finished it yet, but I just want to tell you, my 3-year-old just asked me, are you still reading The Lady with the Tail? How nice is that? It's all worth it. Well, they knew, do you know what, because there's a whole, obviously we live in a capitalist society, there's a whole market now for women writing books about the female experience. Like it's a money thing. The publishers are desperate for us. And it's brilliant because, and again, it's not just female readers, but we're hungry for female experience because we've been denied it. We haven't got enough, and it's all. Some of it feels very much like new territory. They definitely wanted me to have woman in the title, and they definitely wanted the book to be pink. And that's the truth of it. And so there was lots and lots of. I think the first title actually was Animal. It was something about a woman's body. I can't remember now, but there was a different title that then got changed very last minute. I knew I wanted it to be Animal. I wanted it to be Animal on its own because I think like human beings are an animal. We're an animal with an enlarged prefrontal cortex, but we're an animal and we have evolved behaviours that sometimes, because of our prefrontal cortex and how elastic our brain is, we seem more complicated, like we don't have universal behaviours, which is kind of true. We have cultural triggers and environmental triggers, but it felt to me like loads and loads of the reasons we were so unhappy is we couldn't see the pattern in behaviour that comes from, this continued our species for millions of years. And also, I really love animals.
There's a moment where you talk about the fact that sort of in writing the book, you thought maybe if you understood the hormones that are at work, the different forces that are at work, the instincts, whether it would make you better at taking life decisions.
Yeah, I thought I'd become happier.
Everyone is waiting.
I know. Do you know? When I first did press for the book, and a few of the interviews were like, "So now you know all this. Is everything okay?" I was like, "What? What is thinking ever solved anything? It makes it all a million times worse." It's odd. I think that's the thing about, and that's the thing about it not being a self-help book. I just don't have any answers or advice. I think that learning is really, really fun. I think encouraging yourself to think is really, really interesting. You have better discussions. I think you have better meetings with other human beings because of it. But that's all I can offer. I don't have any wedding tips.
but in a way, that I think one of the things that makes the book so successful is the fact that you're not giving any definitive answers. So there's sort of, I used the term subversive in the introduction. I think another word, which is very sort of fashionable at the moment, might be kind of disruptive, in that I think there are, you talk about, even when we're looking at sort of Darwin or Freud, you talk about how much these titans of scientific understanding were shaped by the view of gender in their time. And I think I just had the feeling that when reading it, particularly, as I said, there was so much in it that made me think differently, but I think particularly if I'd been 20 years younger, man or woman, there would have been this sense of kind of, oh, okay, I don't have to, it's maybe not necessarily how I've been led to believe it is. So, men aren't necessarily dominant and women submissive. It's more complicated than that. It's more open than that. And I could just sort of, it's difficult to project myself back into the mind of a teenager, but just, I could imagine that sense of relief, particularly to somebody who was struggling with these lazy stereotypes.
I think teenagers aren't dealing with quite the same lazy stereotypes as you and I were. I think what's going on with teenagers right now in terms of sexuality and gender is incredibly exciting, because majority of them they understand both of those terms in a completely different way, and actually we are catching up. I think it's so interesting what's going to happen in the next 10 years, but there are phrases that, my Cheryl's a school teacher, and so she has a number of trans pupils in both directions, and I didn't realise, but this is really exciting, that at schools in the UK, if a child says that they're in the wrong gendered body, the school will respect that, and they can dress how they want, and they can have the name that they want, and they don't have to tell their parents. So children who come from certain environments where at home they at the moment are having to adhere to the name that they were given and the gender that their body seems to be, and then they go to school and they can be who they want to be, and isn't that amazing? And there are so many public figures who are gender fluid or sexually fluid, and who don't have labels at all. And I think that because of the internet, that conversation actually skipped people like you and me. I'm catching up. I say the wrong phrases all the time. The language changes all the time. You can be 35 now. I'm 35. And because of technology, I'm ancient Egyptian. There's everything all the time. I don't understand. I'm just this really old. I think that's why when I put the references in, like you said in the book, look who's talking, I do have this kind of thing now where I'm playing at being grandma, because that's how it feels.
Yeah. Sure. And then there's also, so in addition to that sort of just, let's say, sort of uprooting everything and saying it's not necessarily what you've what you've been told, what you've inherited, there's also then the different theories which you bring up. There's all the different things around pair bonding, the kamikaze sperm, for example, was something I'd never heard of before.
Well, again, and it should be just widely known about, because it should be taught in sex education. And also, what's so weird to me is that they stopped studying it. It became an unfashionable area of science, rather than, you didn't answer anything. You didn't. I kept having this. So kamikaze sperm, just to summarise for anyone who doesn't know, and it's just the funnest thing to bring up at dinner parties. In all animals, there is some form of sperm competition, which means that, I say all animals, there's probably some that don't, but anyway, sperm competition means that things that happen to the sperm that the male creature emits that makes it combat other males in its species. So for some animals that might be that it forms a plug around the vaginal orifice and that other sperm can't get through. Sometimes it's poisons in the semen, stuff like that. So scientists knew all of this. And then in the 60s, a man in Liverpool University called Jeff Parker decided he'd see what happened if you mixed human sperms together. And he looked under a microscope, and he was so shocked that the sperms were all having a battle. And so then this further study, and they found out that there's two kinds of sperm from a human man. There's kamikaze and egg getters, and kamikaze is 90% of the actual sperms. And basically, there's two kinds of kamikaze. One of them fights, as in, so they notice from hormones emitted by the other ones, and then they just like bash each other. And the other ones, if they get very sleepy, they just they curl up inside mucus. Now, also, I didn't know that you have to mucus in the vagina. It has to be at the right consistency, which is what happens when you ovulate, because sperm has to travel through it. It can't just travel up the vaginal walls because they're so acidic. It has to go through this mucus. And the blockers, which is the other kind of kamikaze, they curl up in the holes. If a man doesn't masturbate for more than 3 days, his sperm become geriatric and they can't fight anymore. They're too tired. And all they do is like just block, and they just go to sleep in these holes. Anyway, dinner parties, guys. Isn't this fascinating? Like, who knew? Like, all this stuff. Also, this is the thing. So masturbation in both genders is really important for conception, I guess. And obviously conception is important because that's how we evolved, not because that's what all of us are living our lives for. But I just have to stress that all the time, because when you talk, and it's very, again, heteronormative. So this is my question. They were like, so there's studies that show that when a man really, really likes the female partner he's sleeping with, he ejaculates higher quality sperm, slightly more of it and more kamikazes, because as if he thinks she's going to be more in demand. If a male, this again, so heteronormative, so if there's a man and woman, and the woman is out of his sight for a couple of days, when they then meet up again, he ejaculates higher quality sperm, slightly more of it and more kamikaze. And this is so fascinating. My next question was, what happens in gay men? Like, is it the same? Is it the same when they like a gay man more? And is it the same, like, oh, when their partner's been away? So actually, it's almost like, so their bodies are behaving exactly the same way. They don't, like, consciously know that this man who can't get pregnant, oh, no one's ever studied it. Like, no one cares. Like, it's not, it's like, I want to know. Like, I'm like, why do they just stop studying this stuff? And also, there's lots of scientists who don't believe in sperm selection. But then, as in human beings, they don't believe in these kamikaze sperm, but they haven't disproved it. He's like, you can't just go like, nah, nah, it's just that guy in Liverpool being crazy. Like, no, you have to prove it to me.
Again, do you think that a lot of that is connected to this sort of desire to sort of preserve a certain way of looking at the world?
I don't think there's a lot of funding for people who go, I just want to understand human sexuality a lot better. I think people go, look, they're having enough babies, we're all surviving, sex is fine, it's very nice. And I think it's a shame. And I think because I think it's so fascinating. And again, I think it helps us. So the thing about the importance of the kamikaze sperm, back to the point, is that it made them realise that women in our evolution, female human beings, had multi-partnered. Otherwise, there would be absolutely no need for this kamikaze sperm. You don't evolve a thing you don't need. And it means that women used to multi-partner. Whether that was consensual or not is another question that people talk about all the time. And also at what point in our evolution this was, and what it means for us as pair bonders.
You mentioned consent then, and this is one moment which is, this will be my last thing before opening questions to the audience, so please ready yourselves. But I do want to talk about this because it's an important moment in the book, and it's an important change in tone. In fact, you kind of preface it by saying, I've told you all this stuff, it's been quite fun, but now, okay, brace yourselves, I'm gonna get serious. And then you dedicate, I think, the last 70 or 80 pages of the book to the concept of consent. Yeah. I mean, why was it so important for you to almost fence this off and say?
Do you know what? If I thought people would read it, I'd have written a whole book about consent. I feel like it's such a huge part. Again, subjectively, it's a huge part of my existence as a female human. I have been scared of rape since I learned what it was. I obsess about it, and it's like that Brown Miller quote, it does affect the life choices that I make. I recently, a New Year, I went on holiday for the first time on my own. I'm 35, and the reason I never have is because I'm so scared of what would happen. And it's stupid, I'm as vulnerable on holidays as anywhere else. When I was 14, a man tried to break into a hotel room. Me and my sisters were there on our own, and he had worked. It's like a family holiday. My mum used to go running every day, and he used to make seagull noises at me and my sister. And then he tried to get into the room when my mum was out running, and she didn't believe me. And since then, I've always had this thing of like, they know where you are, like they know where you are in your resort. And I'm just using that as one example of like, it's a consistent and constant thought. And I'm not saying that there aren't men who also live their life in that way. And actually, and it's a very sad thing, our society isn't dealing very well with attacks on men and the issue of male consent. And I think in terms of support afterwards, men are really being failed in that. So this isn't me to say this is just a female experience, but my female experience is like it's this huge, huge thing. And I wrote the consent part of the book first because I thought it was the most important part, but then almost like so when I was at university, my favourite thing was The Defence of Poesy by Sir Philip Sidney. And he said that the more someone was enjoying themselves, the more that they would learn. And he was saying this as a defence because the universities at the time didn't want to have English literature or drama, and they didn't want to have Shakespeare taught at the university, so they were like, what's the point? And he was trying to say, if you want to speak to people's minds, they have to be having a nice time. And I knew that if I wrote a really didactic book about all of the different kinds of assault that are going on in society, no one would read it, no one would buy it, and I'd probably have to give the advance back. So so in a way, the truth is I was sugaring the pill a lot. And also I'm aware as a comic, if I could make the book funny enough, I could then be serious enough when it needs to be. But I had to make sure, and also being very aware, and it's a bit like on stage, short bursts, you can be very earnest for a second, but you better be about to undercut yourself or entertain me again. Because it's a difficult thing to think about. And also, most of us are thinking about it all the time anyway.
I think it's one of those things as well, which is, in recent years, has been very much in the kind of the cultural conversation. And I know, for example, when I was growing up, I mean, it wasn't something that was talked about at school. It was just I assume people just assumed you would know more or less what was the correct way to behave. And do you think earlier you spoke about the sort of young people being much more keyed into certain terms of specifically concerning gender and sexuality? Do you think it also applies to concepts of consent, and that they are much more keyed in now?
I think there's a balance. I think there are certain situations. I listened to a podcast where men at university in America they were trying to teach them the idea of rolling consent, and they were all really laughing at the idea that you could stop between each thing and like touch a boob and be like, and what about that? Is that okay? And then what, between boobs I have to check again, and the woman like being like, well, why not? Like, and so I think there's difficulty with it. I think there is a difference in that we now don't think that a man who, and again, broad strokes, we know that other things exist. A man attacking a woman, we don't now think it's because he's so horny he can't help himself. And hopefully what is starting to happen is we know that is not in any way that woman's fault, whether she is naked, whether she is incredibly beautiful, whether she was saying all night, I want to have sex with you. Like, it doesn't matter. Hopefully that is getting better. But I think the other side of it, and I think this is where it's very difficult of children of all genders, is that they're very, very sexualized by pornography, and that is a form of play acting that's not being properly deconstructed with them. There's a theory that whatever age it is that children first see porn, whether that's from another child at school or on an iPad accidentally, or the idea is that slightly before that, with someone who's not a member of their family, so ideally a teacher, they should be shown pornography. So if that age is 12 or 11, so it's very young, then a teacher at 10, before they leave primary school, should to sit down and watch a pornography and explain to them the difference between someone acting a thing and someone really doing a thing. And that's how you tool them up. But that's a very unpopular initiative. like no one, even if intellectually you go, that'd be amazing. If you look at a 10-year-old and go, do I want to sit down with them? And oh my God. And also I had a very sheltered life. So I'm one of the people, I first saw pornography in 2001, and it was the week that September the 11th happened. And the two things have really like wrapped together in my brain because I found them equally upsetting. So I didn't grow up thinking this thing was okay. It always looks to me like a, like when you watch an alligator like eating a gazelle, and it's nature. I'm not also like, it's just leave her alone. But that's how I've not been desensitized to pornography, so I have a very hypersensitive, which is almost like there's a really interesting Intelligence Squared debate about it, which is two female pornographers talking to two people who think that pornography should be properly policed. And it's really, really interesting because they were saying that we talk about pornography like the Victorians talked about masturbation, like, oh, it's going to riddle people's minds and they don't engage properly. And actually, I've been researching for my new book all of these studies about how porn affects the male brain. A lot of them are very unreliable. There's a thing, and there's a TED talk which is brilliant about the male brain on pornography, and it says that men who watch a lot of porn get erectile dysfunction, and I just believe that as a fact because it's on a TED talk. And then I looked into it, and it's just facts, guys. Otherwise they wouldn't be allowed. And I looked into it, and actually in the questionnaire that they asked the men, they said, have you ever had erectile dysfunction? So it looks like a really high amount of them, and there's a difference between once having erectile dysfunction and having erectile dysfunction all the time. So again, we have to be questioning these things in the way that we fight back and how we get the information. But again, I do just think essentially the more we talk to each other with the really difficult conversations, then hopefully there's a theory that we're a self-domesticating species, that we breed with people that we think are great people, and that means that we have greater children. And it's a slow process. I think that's very positive. And it makes me think that we're a bit like dogs as well. So it's better.
On which note?
Okay, questions from other people.
If you have a question for Sarah, just raise your hand. We'll get a microphone to you because there's people upstairs and outside. Don't be shy.
It's hard to ask the first question and also there's a lot of pressure asking questions because you feel like it has to be a good question. When I've been in the audience at things, and I'm sure we all have you ever had it when that person just sounds so clever and there isn't a question in it? When they're just like, yeah, because actually no Foucault said that, da, 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 and they do it, they're like, there's not a question. When is someone going to tell him there's not a question?
Yeah.
Hi. My question is just about, you were saying as a comic that there's a lot of prejudice against women or the way you're introduced. Do you see that changing at all, like stuff on TV? How's it changed from when you began to now, and is it changing?
Well, actually, I don't think there is a lot of prejudice against women. That isn't a word I'd use. I think it's a lot of awareness of being a woman, which is different to, I think I have been given positive things on as much as there's been anything negative, and actually I've been very lucky. There are women who could tell you real horror stories from the circuit, and because I was weird, I didn't get booked at those gigs, or I got booked once and not again. Why? Oh, because I went up there being like, I'm due on my period, I'm about to cry. Why's everybody leaving? So I was quite, in my style of comedy, I was lucky I found an audience relatively quickly, and I didn't have to play really sexist, misogynist places. And again, those places are shaped by the comics that they book. If you book comics who are very, very ageist and homophobic, and you draw an audience who want those things and think that is comedy. Do I think it's getting better? Yes, absolutely. But I think I have to be very aware that because things are going better for me, I can't extend that out into an entire world. There's this lovely Michael Frayn quote from the 70s when he was asked about the effects of satire in affecting politics for good. And it's really important to remember, and he said, always be aware of anyone who has a voice under a current system, because that means the system is working for them. It's like, yes, all the time, of course, yeah. It's so easy to make fun of the Prime Minister when you're like, of no threat to him, and it's all working for you, like you're in the top tax bracket. So it's really important. So I can't say, I think there are women who are coming up in the UK who are suffering because there is now 5 women on television and there is no room for them. So off the record, can we off the record this? Because there's a podcast, so I'm not asking you guys to off the record it as well. This is why comedy exists.
Any other questions?
Yeah. So which hotel are you in?
Which hotel am I in? What's that?
He's going to make
seagull noises. Oh, I see. Were you doing a creepy joke?
Let's say it was that.
Let's say it's that and call the police.
Going back to what you were talking about women kind of clubbing together and saying on Mock the Week we'll only perform if we're in it with another woman. Do you think the threat of sisterhood in that sense is a real threat, to people like the guy who's running Mock the Week,
yes,
who feel not only that women are of a worse quality anyway and everyone hates them anyway, but also now they're clubbing together, they're actually a force who are dangerous, who are destabilising what we were once always in control of, and therefore double the need to shut them down?
I think there's lots of people, there's this real thing of being a troublemaker, and making a concession to that. Like, I never shout. Like, I'm a sweet feminist, and that's because the second someone's like, all of us experience people's reactions to other feminists all the time when the idea is like, she's a troublemaker, she's oversensitive, she's straight, and it's that thing, and it's trying to put something, and it's bad in a way, because I think you're absolutely right, your assumption there that if we were just like, hey guys, we run the show now, our feet are under the table, you've got to treat us like this, and it wasn't. It was really, really sweet and softly, and like, guys, we've noticed there's not enough opportunities for other women here, and your show doesn't pay enough to actually be financially viable to us, and while it's a fun show to do, I don't think I'm going to do it until you've kind of moved slightly forward with the times. It was all done in such a nice, we're not threatening your masculinity, the man who books the show, because honestly, we thank you so much for the opportunities. We just hope that those opportunities will be open for more women in the future. So it is a form of manipulation, but only because otherwise, being honest and direct, actually you do get treated like, I hear about my colleagues all the time, like, she's getting a reputation, when all it means they were like, why do I need to be in a hot tub? Like, they were asking those kind of questions and being seen, like, especially with actors, either it's fine, but a certain costume thing, or a certain someone doing something in a way that they don't like, and then just questioning it, and then being treated like, well, yeah, she's getting a reputation. Like, but why? Her character was a simpering idiot, and she tried to improve it, or tell you how she would feel if she was watching a character behave in that way. I think in a war, which I'm not saying that is what this is, but you can try all different kinds of strategies to get what you want. And so I think that's why I'm probably not hugely direct. I'm not confrontational, actually. I'm not confrontational, but it doesn't mean I'm not trying to work out how to win.
On that subject as well, I remember you saying, I think it was in another interview, that the cards in these kind of shows as well are very much stacked against women, because you're kind of shepherded off into hair and makeup for several hours.
Well, the time tax in life, like, I am a dirty girl who doesn't wash my hair, and I don't wear makeup very often, and I don't like shave. I'm hairy as well, and it's not because I'm making a feminist statement. It's I don't have the time, because it would be a choice between watching a box set or being clean, and I can't, and I think that's the thing. Like, I look at, and I love all the different kinds I'm fascinated with looking at women. I love beautiful women. I love well-groomed women. This isn't a judgment of like women shouldn't be this, but I do feel like you get up an hour earlier than me, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Straightening my hair when I could be asleep, and so yeah, on those jobs it's interesting, because essentially I've got better at it. I find small talk difficult, and actually being touched by someone, and they're usually women doing your makeup and hair, all of it used to make me very anxious, and I'm much more used to it now, and I get better at it, and I get better at using that time to meet people and meet these women who, they have the best gossip in the entirety of the industry. Like, they know everything about everyone, but at the beginning they found it very hard that the men would be in a team or in a room together talking about jokes, and the one woman is being made to look like a pretty flower, because that's why she's there.
Yeah, and then have the time to write, because these shows aren't quite as spontaneous as
nothing's real.
I think we have time for one more question. Would anybody like to jump in there?
Oh, there's a question, is there?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
So I wanted to ask a question about like intersectionality, because that's a conversation that a lot of people are having, like around the Women's March, and a lot of really famous female comics who are overwhelmingly white, and the lack of like, you know, racially diverse voices. So like, how much like have you encountered, for example, if there's a black female comic and her relation to your same profession, and why isn't she getting a book deal? And what do you think that we, as like, you know, privileged white women, can do to kind of lift up those voices and get them heard too? Because I feel like, you know, we say women overwhelmingly, but like a white woman's experience is really different from. Yeah.
So the first thing, as you say, is the knowing that we're privileged. And we were talking about this just upstairs, you know, and again about the Women's March, because I don't know if any of you have had this experience with men that you know who consider themselves to be feminists, and when you pull them up on something that they've said, get really defensive, like, I'm one of the good guys. Like, I don't hit women. I'm listening to you right now. like how dare you? And you're trying to go, no. And the thing with so just use this example first, and then those men, they were like, I'm giving you the power right now, and like, that's the whole point. It's your power to give. Like, this is how it shouldn't work. I shouldn't be having to earn it from you or pleasing you. Or you're not. This is like this condensation. I can't pronounce the word. Leaning down, like, don't worry, we're sharing. So there's that. And then white women, when someone that we are then questioned about not being properly inclusive, then going, what? Why are they attacking us? We're trying to do good. Guys, we're doing it for you. If you want to be in our stuff, we'll let you be in it. And that's what happened. So one of my friends has a podcast. It's a feminist podcast. And the first time I did it, again, it's just trying to police yourself. And I was saying, you've only ever had white guests. We've got a real struggle at the moment because it's different kinds of feminism, because we're talking about very different things. And we don't know what that is unless they tell us. And then her being like, oh, now I'm giving like these women of colour, I have a certain amount of natural representative. But then I'm saying, but that's not enough. It shouldn't be fitting into our, which is exactly the problem with intersectionality. And then realising that, like, it shouldn't be, we can carve you holes. And then I realised that the difference is in audience. Like, again, it's a capitalist society. We have to seek out the work of women of colour to be informed by it and to show them that we're fascinated by them. And then again, everything speaks in money and numbers. If when you're thinking about going to see a play, you go, oh, hang on, I'm just going to check what's coming up in the next month. And if any of those authors are non-white, and they'll be talking about a different experience. And by being there, by sitting in the room, you're showing, I'm interested, I care, I'll know more. And anyone who's looking at the numbers of your play goes, whoa, okay, let's commission another play from that person. I think being an audience can be part of it. And also, and it's really scary, is knowing that we're going to say the wrong things. And I'm going to use the wrong phraseology, and I'm going to be patronising accidentally. And then, and anything that seems like, oh, now we're here. Now, like, it's the listening thing, isn't it? It's going, okay, tell me, and I'll stop talking, if that makes sense. Anyway, but also it is hard because all of us, we can't help it. We have an ego. Everything's subjective. No one's really exists, do they? Do they, guys? No one else really exists. To go back to Marquis de Sade, my favourite. So, and also, yeah, knowing that we're fallible with it.
Just to conclude, a couple of times you've made allusions to your next book, what you're working on now. I don't know if you're able to talk about it or keen to talk about it?
So. I don't keen to have it finished. So I'm really early. I'm researching it, and I'm really fascinated in this subject. I'm writing about how we evolved to want to have status over other people, power. I'm writing about sex. I'm writing more about men in this book. I didn't talk about pornography or sex work in this book at all, and that's because they weren't things that just affect women. They affect both genders in terms of the interaction, and also because of male sex workers and men in pornography. And a lot of the feminist books I've read ignore that men are in porn or work in sex work. I'm really, really fascinated about it. I'm fascinated how we evolved to want to be stronger than other people and to have empathy failure. And we have it now. It's really, and it's something that I do as well. But there are some people in the world we don't care about properly, and we're living in the Western world. Someone somewhere is always suffering every time we buy or eat anything, and we just continue. And I wonder how that will be looked back on by hopefully more empathetic future generations. So at the moment I'm doing lots and lots of research into kind of prisons and masculinity and assaults on men and also how those things are dealt with. I've noticed loads in comedy recently that the idea of a man being sexually assaulted is funny in a way that there's a story in Veep, which I love the show Veep, but there's a story about someone who's being groped by a man, and Veep is such a mature show, and to still have that kind of storyline where it's like, I understand why some men are really angry, because like young men are being failed, and I know. So I want to write a book that's more like, it's going to seem like I'm really anti-feminist in it, but to be more about all the things, other things that come under the caring about human beings that is feminism.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're keen, I think, for you to finish it too now. Can't wait for it. Please do pick up a copy of Animal. Buy one for yourselves, for your sisters, your brothers, your parents. Buy it for everyone. We have plenty of copies at the till. I'm sure Sarah will be happy to sign them for you. Please do stick around. We will be serving wine, so the evening is not yet over. So one more time, please do give it up for Sarah Pascoe.